Welcome, everybody, to our deep dive today. We're going deep into Liber Novus, or, as most people know it, The Red Book by Carl Jung.
Yeah, this book is really something special. It's Jung's own exploration of his unconscious.
I know, it's not like we get to see this kind of stuff every day, right?
Well,
Someone who helped shape how we understand things like the collective unconscious.
absolutely. Jung started this back in 1913 as a personal record.
It's amazing when you think about it.
Yeah.
A mix of his fantasies from his journal, the black books.
Right, the Black Books. And alongside them, he's got all his own commentary and analysis of those experiences, trying to figure out what they mean.
So it's not just like a dream journal or something. It's really a deliberate effort to chart his inner world.
You got it. And you have to remember the context, too. I mean, this is all happening as World War I is brewing.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, to connect your own struggles with something as huge as a world war.
It's a big connection.
Yeah.
And it's a big part of what makes the Red Book so fascinating. And there's also the influence of other thinkers at the time, people like Flournoy, James, and Myers.
They were all looking into the subconscious, right?
Yeah. They were trying to understand things like spiritualism, psychic phenomena, all from a psychological angle.
So it wasn't about proving or disproving, ghosts or anything.
No, it was about what those experiences could tell us about the human mind itself.
I see. And didn't Jung get really into Flournoy's work?
Yes, he did. Particularly Flournoy's study of this medium, Helene Smith, and how she'd go into these altered states of consciousness.
It's like, did Jung see those methods, the things mediums used, as tools for psychology, like automatic writing and things?
He did, in a way. He called his approach active imagination, and you can definitely see echoes of those practices, adapted for his own exploration.
Ah, okay, so that's where the black books come in, right? They're like the unedited version. And the red book is the final draft.
Kind of. But
Yeah.
even in its more refined form, the Red Book keeps that raw, intense quality of Jung's experiences. He even included mandalas he drew during his time in the military. It's like a visual diary, almost.
Wow, so he's using art not just to express himself, but to actually process what's going on inside.
Yeah. And it's this internal world where things start to get really interesting. Jung starts to see his own anxieties, his own visions, reflected in the events building up to the war.
So he's suggesting a connection between what's happening in him and what's happening out in the world.
That's right. It was a turning point for him. His precognitive dreams, those glimpses into the future, he started to see them lining up with real-world events. And it solidified his idea of the collective unconscious.
The collective unconscious, this idea that there's this shared space with images and archetypes connecting us all.
Exactly. So the Red Book isn't just a personal thing, it's reflecting something bigger.
Right. Those shifts happening in culture and society at large.
It's wild to think Jung wasn't doing this in a bubble, right? He was really engaged with the thinkers and scientists of his day.
Yeah, like we talked about Flournoy, but figures like William James and Frederick Myers.
Oh, absolutely. They were huge, real pioneers in looking into the subconscious and those, let's call them paranormal experiences.
Right. And Myers' idea of a subliminal self.
Yeah, that really clicked with Jung, this idea that our minds have these layers, stuff we're not even aware of consciously.
And this was all happening when psychology was just getting started. Still a very young field.
Right. So much experimentation, borrowing from other areas, trying to grasp how the mind works.
It sounds like Jung wasn't always happy with, traditional psychiatry.
You got it. He found it too limited. He was drawn to this idea of using clinical encounters as research, like hypnosis, deep conversations, really exploring the psyche.
Kind of a rebel, pushing the boundaries.
Oh, totally. And that led him to question the big theories of the time, like even Freud's ideas about repressed desires.
Because he felt like there was something more.
Yes, a deeper level, something beyond just personal experiences.
And that's where the collective unconscious comes in.
Bingo. That shared reservoir of images, archetypes, those instincts common to all of us. And the Red Book actually shows us how Jung got there.
It's like witnessing the birth of a whole new understanding of the mind.
Exactly. So we've got this incredible mix, right? Science, personal exploration, philosophy, all converging in this book.
But I know there's this debate. Is the Red Book art? Or is it a psychological document?
That's a question that still gets Jungian scholars going.
Because it's beautiful, right? The calligraphy, the mandalas, people see that and say it's art.
For sure. But Jung, he pushed back against that label.
He did. Why was that?
For Jung, the power was in the symbols, in the communication, not in how it looked aesthetically. He saw it as a record of his confrontation with the unconscious.
It wasn't about making something pretty.
Right, it was about wrestling with those depths and then sharing what he found.
It's like he's saying, look beyond the surface, there's deeper meaning here.
Exactly, and he knew symbols are tricky. They can have so many meanings.
Even he didn't claim to fully understand it all.
That's the thing, he was very humble about it. He didn't present the Red Book as some definitive guide. It was his journey, hoping to inspire others to explore their own depths.
Not to follow his steps exactly.
Right. It's about finding your own path. And that's where Jung's idea of not imitating comes in.
So there's no right way to read this book.
I think the best way is to see it as a conversation starter. What resonates with you? What questions does it spark?
Not about finding all the answers.
No, but about finding the right questions. The Red Book is a testament to how powerful it can be to face the unconscious, to integrate its wisdom. But it's not a blueprint.
Speaking of wisdom, can we talk more about Philemon? He's such a mysterious figure.
Oh, Philemon. He's more than just a wise guide. He's like Jung's unconscious personified.
Okay, so he represents the part of Jung that Jung himself is trying to understand.
Yes. He embodies that dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious, that dance between reason and intuition.
That's really at the core of Jungian psychology, isn't it?
It is. And Philemon, he represents that balance Jung was after.
So he's like the wisdom that comes when we embrace all of who we are, even the dark parts.
Exactly. That integration is crucial for becoming a whole, unique individual.
But Jung's path wasn't easy, was it? He went through some tough stuff, like that confrontation with the Red One.
Yeah, that was intense. She's this powerful figure, the feminine, but both alluring and dangerous.
It sounds like it wasn't just about desire or temptation.
No, it was about facing those shadow aspects, the things we try to bury.
Like a classic hero's journey.
Totally. That's why the idea of the shadow self is so important. Jung believed everyone has that darker side, and until we confront it, we can't be whole.
So the Red One, she's not just evil. She actually pushes Jung to grow.
Yes, she represents those raw energies that we need to learn to handle, to integrate into our personalities.
It's amazing how these female figures are so central to Jung's story. They're not just passive characters.
Right, they're driving forces in his transformation.
That's one of the key differences between him and Freud, right?
For sure. Jung saw the feminine as so much more than just sexual. It's a source of wisdom, creativity, even spiritual insight.
So all these layers come together in the Red Book. It's this incredible tapestry of Jung's struggles, his philosophy, historical context, everything.
And it's still just a glimpse into the vastness of Jungian psychology. There's so much more.
Okay, so now for the grand finale, the 7 sermons to the dead. This is where things get really out there, right?
It is. We see a side of Jung that doesn't always get talked about, this mystical, philosophical dimension.
It's not just psychology anymore, is it? We've got this whole cosmology, strange gods, questioning good and evil, the whole thing.
Yeah, and this figure, Abraxas, Jung introduces him, and Abraxas embodies both creation and destruction. It's a force that goes beyond those simple ideas of good versus bad.
So it's not about worshiping a good god. It's more about understanding that reality. It includes both sides. Light and dark, creation and destruction.
Exactly. And it ties into this idea of the pleroma, a realm of pure potential where all these opposites, they exist together.
We've got Abraxas, the pleroma, sermons to the dead. It's a lot. Where did Jung even get all this from?
Well, remember how he used active imagination? Those explorations of the unconscious, the sermons, they came from that. Almost like, they were channeled from somewhere deeper.
Channeled, like those mediums getting messages from spirits.
Similar. But Jung was very clear. These messages, they were from inside him, from his own psyche. They were symbolic representations of a truth beyond his personal experience.
So not literal spirits, but tapping into something deeper, using symbols as the language.
That's it. And the message itself, it's pretty radical. He challenges those traditional ideas of God, of morality. It's much more nuanced, paradoxical.
Like, give me an example. What are some of the big ideas here?
Well, there's this image Jung uses, the God of the Frogs. It represents this fusion of the Christian God with Satan.
The God of the Frogs. Okay, so that's pretty wild, but what does it mean?
It's about how opposites can be integrated. Even these forces that seem totally contradictory, they're actually connected.
So it's not about clinging to just one side, to just the good or just the bad. We have to accept the whole thing.
Yeah, and that's a core part of individuation. We can't become whole by denying parts of ourselves. We have to acknowledge both light and shadow.
It's definitely a challenge, but also it's kind of freeing, isn't it?
It is. The sermons, They give us a peek into that process, that psychological shift, moving past that simple black and white thinking, embracing a more complete picture of reality.
So we've got Abraxas, the Pleroma, the god of the frogs, and this idea of embracing opposites. What's the takeaway for us reading these sermons today?
I think the big takeaway is that Jung wants us to question everything. Our assumptions about reality, about God, about where we fit in the grand scheme of things. He's saying, don't settle for easy answers. Keep exploring. Keep asking questions, even if those questions lead you to uncomfortable places.
He didn't want followers. He wanted fellow explorers, people willing to dive into those depths.
That's it. Engage with your own unconscious, confront those shadow parts, and bring all of that together into a more whole, more authentic you.
And maybe along the way, we each find our own version of Philemon, that inner guide, that wisdom to help us navigate our own minds.
The journey to wholeness, it looks different for everyone. The Red Book reminds us that the journey itself, that's the point.
I love that. That's a great note to end on. Thanks so much for being with us on this deep dive into the Red Book. And to all our listeners, keep exploring, keep questioning, and until next time, happy diving.